On February 12th, 1912, a 6-year-old emperor lost a throne that had existed in one form or another for more than 2,000 years. His name was Puyi. He did not lose it in battle. There was no final charge through the Forbidden City. Instead, an abdication decree ended the Qing dynasty and transformed the Chinese Empire into a republic. It looked like the end of an ancient political system. But China had collapsed before. Many times. Dynasties had fallen. Capitals had burned. Nomadic conquerors had ruled the north. Mongols had conquered the entire country. Rebellions had killed millions. And yet political unity kept returning. That is the central pattern of Chinese history. China did not survive for thousands of years by remaining the same. It survived by repeatedly rebuilding something that people still recognized as China. The story begins long before emperors. Early communities developed along the Yellow River and Yangtze regions, producing agriculture, cities, bronze technology, and increasingly complex states. Chinese tradition remembers the Xia as the first dynasty. Archaeology has revealed sophisticated Bronze Age societies from the period associated with it, but matching those remains perfectly to the traditional Xia story is still debated. With the Shang, the evidence becomes much clearer. By the 2nd millennium BC, Shang rulers controlled important territories in northern China. They used bronze on an extraordinary scale, performed royal rituals, and left the earliest widely accepted body of Chinese writing on oracle bones. Those inscriptions already reveal something that will matter throughout this story. Power was political, military, and sacred at the same time. Around the 11th century BC, the Zhou conquered the Shang. They justified the conquest with an idea that would outlive both dynasties: the mandate of heaven. A ruler governed because heaven permitted it, but that mandate was conditional. Disaster, corruption, rebellion, and military defeat could be interpreted as signs that a dynasty had lost the right to rule. That was an incredibly useful political idea. It allowed rebellion to be condemned when a dynasty was strong and justified after the dynasty had fallen. Before we continue, my name is Noah. We built this channel for people who want the full story behind the civilizations, empires, and turning points that shaped the world we know today. If that sounds like you, subscribe. It is free and it helps us make better videos more than you might think. All right, back to China. The Zhou ruled for centuries, but their authority weakened. Regional lords became increasingly independent. The spring and autumn period produced intense competition between states and some of China's most influential thinkers. Confucius argued that political order depended on moral conduct, hierarchy, ritual, education, and responsible rule. Other traditions offered different answers. Legalist thinkers emphasized laws, rewards, punishment, and a powerful state. Taoist thinkers questioned the value of rigid political control altogether. Then competition became war. By the Warring States period, rival kingdoms were building larger armies, reforming taxation, expanding bureaucracies, and destroying weaker neighbors. War itself changed. Infantry armies became larger. Cavalry became more important. Iron weapons spread. States counted households, taxed land, and tried to turn populations into resources that could be mobilized for war. Qin pushed these reforms especially far. Its rulers rewarded military service, weakened hereditary aristocrats, expanded agriculture, and built a government capable of extracting soldiers and taxes with unusual efficiency. The system was harsh. It was also extremely effective. One state became especially good at the brutal competition the warring states had created: Qin. In 221 BC, the king of Qin conquered the last rival state. He took a new title: Qin Shi Huang, first emperor. For the first time, a single imperial government claimed authority across the major Chinese states. Qin abolished much of the old feudal political order and divided territory into administrative commanderies. Weights and measures were standardized. Writing was standardized. Roads connected the empire. Earlier defensive walls were linked and extended along northern frontiers. The emperor built an enormous tomb complex guarded by what we now call the Terracotta Army. He also ruled through coercion, forced labor, heavy taxation, and severe punishment. And then comes the contradiction. The dynasty that created Imperial China survived for barely 15 years after unification. The political model it created survived in different forms for more than 2,000. Qin collapsed in rebellion soon after the first emperor's death. The Han dynasty inherited the empire, but instead of discarding the Qin system, the Han modified it. They kept central bureaucracy and territorial administration while presenting rule through a more Confucian political language. Under emperors such as Han Wudi, the state expanded deep into Central Asia and fought the Yongnu Confederation along the northern frontier. Chinese envoys and merchants connected with trading networks stretching west. Later generations would call these routes the Silk Roads. The Han period became so important that the word Han later became one of the major cultural identities associated with China's majority population. It also helped establish a pattern that later dynasties would repeatedly reuse: a central imperial court working through local officials, written law, taxation, military colonies, and educated administrators whose legitimacy depended on serving a unified state. But no dynasty escaped the cycle forever. Court struggles, powerful families, rebellion, and military fragmentation weakened the Han. In 220 AD, the dynasty formally ended. The empire fractured. The Three Kingdoms period produced famous rivals such as Cao Cao's successors in Wei, Liu Bei's Shu, and Sun Quan's Wu. Later literature would turn this struggle into one of China's most famous historical epics. Political unity, however, remained unstable for centuries. The Jin briefly reunified much of the empire, then lost control as invasions, migrations, and civil war divided north and south. This matters because Chinese history is often imagined as an uninterrupted line of dynasties ruling one stable territory. It was not. Division could last for generations. Then the Sui reunited China in the late 6th century. Like Qin, the dynasty was short. Like Qin, its institutional legacy was enormous. The Sui strengthened central government and expanded the Grand Canal system, linking the grain-producing south more directly to the political centers of the north. Massive construction and failed wars against Goguryeo helped destroy the dynasty. The Tang inherited what remained. Under the Tang, imperial China reached another peak of political, military, commercial, and cultural influence. Chang'an became one of the world's great cities. Merchants, monks, diplomats, and travelers connected China with Central Asia and beyond. Buddhism flourished alongside older Chinese traditions. The imperial bureaucracy expanded, and examination culture became increasingly important. But Tang power also had limits. In 755, the An Lushan Rebellion devastated the empire. The dynasty survived, but military governors gained power and central control weakened. In 907, Tang rule ended. Another period of fragmentation followed. Then the Song dynasty reunited much of China. And this is where the story changes. By the Song period, China had one of the most sophisticated commercial economies on earth. Cities grew, printing expanded access to books, paper money circulated on a large scale, gunpowder weapons developed. The compass became increasingly important to navigation. Markets connected regions more intensely than before. But economic sophistication did not guarantee military security. The Song faced powerful states on its northern frontiers, including the Khitan Liao and the Jurchen Jin. The Jin eventually drove the Song court south. Then an even larger force appeared from the steppe: the Mongols. Genghis Khan began the Mongol expansion into northern China. His successors destroyed the Jin and continued attacking the southern Song. Kublai Khan founded the Yuan dynasty and eventually completed the conquest in 1279. For the first time, all of China was ruled by a dynasty founded by Mongol conquerors. But calling the Yuan simply foreign rule misses part of the story. Kublai was also governing through Chinese institutions, taxes, cities, officials, and agricultural regions while remaining ruler of a much wider Mongol imperial world. China had been conquered. It had not disappeared. The Yuan connected China more directly to a huge Eurasian imperial system. Merchants and travelers moved across routes protected by Mongol power, while the court governed a population far larger and more urbanized than the steppe societies from which the conquerors had emerged. But Yuan rule faced rebellion, fiscal pressure, natural disasters, and growing hostility. Less than a century after Kublai completed the conquest, rebellion drove the Yuan court from China. In 1368, Zhu Yunzhang founded the Ming dynasty as the Hongwu emperor. The Ming rebuilt central administration and restored rule by a native dynasty. Hongwu distrusted powerful officials and concentrated authority intensely around the throne. His successor, Yongle, moved the capital to Beijing, rebuilt the imperial center there, and projected Chinese power far beyond its shores. Between the early 1400s and the 1430s, Zheng He commanded enormous state-sponsored fleets through Southeast Asia and across the Indian Ocean, reaching ports in India, Arabia, and East Africa. The voyages later ended. That did not mean China simply turned its back on the sea. Private commerce continued, coastal communities remained deeply connected to maritime Asia, and by the 16th century, Chinese demand for silver was reshaping global trade. Silver from Japan and, eventually, the Americas entered Chinese markets through international networks. The Ming also rebuilt and expanded many of the Great Wall sections people recognize today, responding to renewed pressure from the northern frontier. Yet pressure accumulated. The court faced fiscal problems, factional conflict, environmental stress, rebellion, and renewed danger from the northeast. In 1644, rebel forces captured Beijing. The last Ming emperor in the capital died. Manchu armies then entered through the Great Wall and established the Qing dynasty. The Qing were conquerors from beyond the old Ming frontier. But over the next century, they built an empire even larger than the Ming state. Under rulers such as Kangxi and Qianlong, Qing power expanded into Mongolia, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Taiwan. The resulting empire was multi-ethnic and governed different regions through different institutions. By the 18th century, Qing China was one of the largest and richest empires on earth. Then a relatively small British expedition revealed a completely different balance of military power. British demand for Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain sent silver into China. British merchants increasingly sold Indian opium illegally in the opposite direction. When Qing official Lin Zexu moved against the trade, Britain used naval force. The First Opium War began in 1839. The Treaty of Nanjing forced China to open treaty ports, pay indemnities, and cede Hong Kong. Later agreements expanded foreign privileges and extraterritorial rights. This began what later Chinese memory often calls the Century of Humiliation, a long period of foreign intervention, unequal treaties, lost territory, and internal crisis. But foreign pressure was only part of the disaster. The Taiping Rebellion exploded in the 1850 and became one of history's deadliest civil wars. The Qing survived, then tried to strengthen itself with foreign weapons, arsenals, industry, and military reform. The effort was uneven. Defeat by Japan in 1895 exposed how far China had fallen behind a neighbor that had modernized much faster. The Boxer Crisis brought another foreign intervention. By 1911, the dynasty could no longer contain the political pressure. Revolution spread. Provinces abandoned Qing rule. In February 1912, Puyi abdicated. We are back at the opening. The empire was gone, the republic was not stable. Sun Yat-sen briefly became provisional president before yielding to Yuan Shikai. Yuan later tried and failed to become emperor himself. After his death, warlords divided much of the country. Nationalism surged through movements such as May 4th. The Nationalist Party and the newly founded Chinese Communist Party emerged as rival forces. Japan seized Manchuria in 1931 and launched full-scale war in 1937. Chinese cities were occupied, and Japanese forces committed mass atrocities, including the Nanjing Massacre. After Japan's defeat in 1945, civil war resumed. The Communists won the mainland. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong proclaimed the People's Republic of China in Beijing. Chiang Kai-shek's Republic of China government retreated to Taiwan, creating a political division that remains unresolved. The new state transformed land ownership, industry, education, and political life. The Great Leap Forward contributed to catastrophic famine and mass death. The Cultural Revolution then threw the country into another period of political violence and institutional upheaval. After Mao's death in 1976, Deng Xiaoping pushed China toward economic reform, foreign investment, special economic zones, and deeper integration into global trade, while Communist Party political rule remained intact. In 1989, demonstrations centered on Tiananmen Square were violently suppressed after martial law was imposed. Hong Kong returned from British to Chinese sovereignty in 1997. In the 21st century, China became central to global manufacturing, trade, infrastructure, and technology. But the most important lesson from this entire timeline is not that China never changed. It changed constantly. Shang disappeared, Zhou fractured, Qin unified and collapsed. Han fell. The Sui reunified China and vanished. Tang rose and declined. Song prospered and was conquered. Mongols ruled. Ming replaced them. The Manchus conquered the Ming. Empire became republic. Republic fragmented. War and revolution created another state. What endured was not one dynasty, one political system, or one set of borders. It was the repeated idea that political unity could be rebuilt around shared institutions, written culture, political traditions, and memories of earlier unifications. China's history is not the story of one empire that never fell. It is the story of how many times it did, and how often something called China emerged again.